Welcome to our channel, where real-life stories filled with drama and emotion are brought to life in the most authentic way possible. If this is your first time here, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of the compelling stories we share. And if you're already part of our loyal audience, thank you for always being with us and supporting our journey. Now, get ready to dive into a story that will surely keep you glued to the screen. When I first moved to the lakeside community of Willow Creek, I carried with me the hope of a peaceful new beginning. After years of living amidst the relentless pace of city life, all I wanted was a quiet place where I could enjoy my morning coffee on the porch and listen to the gentle rustle of leaves in the evening breeze. My new home, a country-style cottage with a white picket fence and a front yard full of wildflowers, was everything I had ever dreamed of. I was ready to embrace the typical challenges that come with settling into a new neighborhood, getting to know the neighbors, remembering the trash schedule, and learning those unspoken rules that every community seems to have. The first few days were exactly what I had imagined. The mailman smiled warmly. An elderly couple from across the street brought over homemade cookies, and in the afternoons, the sound of children playing echoed down the block. I thought, maybe I had finally found the perfect place to start over, but then, like a shadow rising from the ground, something began to cast a chill over those peaceful days. Or rather, someone. Her name was Karen. I still don't know what I did wrong. All I remember is that the very first time our eyes met on the shared walkway, she looked at me as if I'd spray-painted graffiti on a community monument. No one warned me that Willow Creek wasn't just white fences and pretty gardens. It was also home to a self-appointed HOA queen, who seemed to monitor every step a newcomer took. I had never met anyone like Karen, a woman who truly believed this neighborhood was her personal kingdom, and everyone in it was expected to kneel and obey. At first, I thought it was just a fleeting misunderstanding. But then came the absurd warnings, the scrutinizing stares, and the condescending tone that gave me a chilling realization. I had unknowingly stepped into a place where the rules were unlike anything I'd ever known, and the one writing them was Karen. After just a few short days of peace, I began to feel an unsettling discomfort creeping in, born from the smallest of things, and it always led back to the same name, Karen. It started with little notes left at my door, written in such sharp, pointed handwriting that I could almost hear her sarcastic voice as I read them. Grass must be trimmed shorter to meet neighborhood standards. I shrugged it off, thinking it was a friendly reminder, until it became as regular as the trash collection schedule. The following week, another note appeared. Your trash bin is misaligned by 1 inch. Please correct immediately. Then came an official complaint from the HOA, worded like a bulletin from some kind of military review board. The porch light you've installed is disrupting the community's nighttime aesthetic. Mind you, it was a single solar-powered light, dimmer than moonlight. That's when I started to realize these weren't harmless reminders. This was a power play orchestrated by Karen, a woman who saw herself as the self-appointed guardian of Willow Creek's soul. Each note, each passive-aggressive glare when I stepped outside, each overly specific complaint was a calculated strike, an unspoken message that my right to live here was somehow hers to grant. The most baffling part was, I had never provoked her. I never complained, never caused a scene, and even tried to follow her ridiculous demands. Yet every time I gave an inch, she took 2 more. This wasn't a series of petty disagreements anymore. It was a silent war, and I began to feel like a pawn on a chessboard I never agreed to play on. But Karen had chosen me as her target, or rather, she had chosen the wrong person. That morning, I had just finished brewing my coffee when I found a thick envelope in the mailbox, embossed with the Willow Creek Homeowners Association logo. I was no stranger to these kinds of letters. Most of them were absurd warnings from Chief Overseer Karen. But this time, the moment I tore open the envelope and read the first line, I had to do a double take. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Notice of eviction. I laughed. A reflex, really, because of how ridiculous it all was. I'm the legal owner of this home. How could the HOA possibly evict me? But that laugh quickly faded when I reached the final line. Failure to comply will result in foreclosure proceedings. One word hit me like a punch to the gut. Foreclosure. This wasn't petty anymore. Karen was upping the stakes. I knew some HOAs had exploited legal loopholes, stacking up ridiculous fines to trap homeowners in financial quicksand, then swooping in to buy their homes at a fraction of their worth. If that was Karen's game plan, she clearly had no idea she'd chosen the wrong target. I left my breakfast untouched and walked straight into my office. I opened my property investment files, and a slow smile spread across my face as I flipped to the page I was looking for, a lease agreement. Right there, in bold ink, was Karen's name. She wasn't some untouchable queen of the neighborhood. She was a tenant, and the house she lived in was mine. The irony couldn't have been more perfect. The person trying to evict me from a home I owned was herself living in property that I had every legal right to reclaim. If she wanted a power game, then it was time to return the board to the hands of the real player, and I wouldn't be sending an email. This checkmate would be delivered in person. That afternoon, I walked slowly toward the beige house at the end of the street, the very spot where Karen so often stood like a self-appointed judge, scrutinizing every yard, every flower bed, every porch light in the neighborhood. And today was no different. She was berating a poor neighbor about a fence being half an inch too tall. But when she spotted me approaching, Karen immediately turned, arms crossed, with a smug expression that suggested she was about to deliver a final verdict. "You received the notice, didn't you?" she said, her voice dripping with triumph. "Nothing personal, of course. You just don't meet the standards of this community, and we can't allow that." I took a deep breath, trying to suppress the grin dancing just beneath the surface. "Oh, I received it," I said calmly, "and I've got a response." I pulled a stack of papers from a folder and handed them to her. It was a notice of lease termination, signed by me, the legal property owner. Karen frowned, her eyes scanning the page. By the third line, I saw the color drain from her face. What is this?" she stammered. "I'm your landlord, Karen," I replied, my voice calm but unmistakably sharp. "You tried to evict a property owner while living in a home you're only renting from me. As of today, your lease is no longer valid." Her hands trembled as she held the document. Her mouth opened, then closed again, searching for a rebuttal. But for the first time since I moved in, Karen was speechless. "You can't do this," she whispered. "Oh, I can," I said softly. And I just did. In that moment, the illusion of power Karen had wielded over the neighborhood shattered. Gone was the arrogance. Gone was the condescending glare. All that remained was confusion and fear etched across her face. The battle she thought she had already won was, in truth, only just beginning. And this time, she wasn't the one holding the pieces. After that fiery confrontation, I thought Karen would retreat and reflect on everything she had done. But I had clearly underestimated her absurd capacity for resistance. Less than 24 hours later, an email from the Willow Creek Homeowners Association popped up in my inbox, stamped with a bright red subject line. "Warning for unauthorized eviction. Serious HOA violation." I didn't even need to open it to guess who was behind it. Karen, of course. I clicked the email and it read like something out of a small-town comedy sketch. "Any attempt by a resident to evict another community member without the explicit approval of the board will be considered retaliatory behavior and a serious breach of HOA regulations. Failure to cease this action immediately may result in severe fines and legal action from the association." I couldn't decide whether to be angry or to laugh. Karen was now trying to weaponize the very rulebook she had once manipulated, using it to shield herself from the consequences of the mess she had created. But I wasn't going to argue over email. Instead, I gathered every document I had. The lease agreement, her violation notices, even a printed copy of the HOA warning, and headed straight to the local police station to get ahead of the nonsense. I wasn't about to let her drag me into one of her legal bullying traps. And then, like a scene from a scripted drama, there was a knock at my door that afternoon. 2 officers stood on my front porch. "We're here to follow up on a report of an unlawful eviction and resident intimidation," one of them said. I nodded, invited them in, and calmly laid everything out. I had nothing to hide. One by one, I presented each document, every clause, every signature, every timestamp. They read, they reviewed, and finally, one of them exhaled with a weary sigh. "It's all legal," he said. "No violations here. She doesn't seem to understand the law very well." They left soon after, but not before knocking on Karen's door. I couldn't hear the whole conversation, but the final line echoed loud and clear across the quiet street. This is a civil matter. Don't call us unless it's an actual emergency. Karen had just been served a legal slap in the face, and that was only the opening act. Karen wasn't one to accept defeat, at least not easily. The moment she realized the police weren't on her side, she switched tactics. Delay the inevitable at all costs. For the next 30 days, instead of packing up and moving out like any reasonable person, Karen turned each of my mornings into a bitter farce. First came a formal complaint filed with the local housing department, accusing me of systematic harassment, despite the fact that every shred of evidence told the exact opposite story. That case was dismissed in less than a week. Undeterred, she then filed an appeal with the HOA board, desperately trying to cling to whatever scraps of authority she had left. But this time, the board, once filled with members who used to follow her every command, offered no support. Everyone could see it now. This wasn't a petty neighborly dispute. It was a much-needed reckoning, and Karen was the one who needed to go. The closer eviction day came, the more erratic she became. I once caught her at dawn, standing on my front lawn, planting a sign that read, "This property is under legal dispute," as if she were waging some noble crusade. Neighbors began whispering. Some quietly withdrew their support, others openly ignored her. Karen, once the silent fear that loomed over the neighborhood, had become a punchline. I remained calm. No need for retaliation, no shouting matches. Everything was now in the hands of the law, and the clock was ticking toward Judgment Day. All I had to do was wait. Karen, on the other hand, couldn't sit still. She filed an emergency stay request. Denied. She even hired a bargain bin attorney to send me a threatening letter, a sloppy draft that failed to sway anyone in authority. She tried everything: manipulation, pleading, personal attacks. But the more she struggled, the deeper she sank into her own weakness. And for the first time since I moved in, I truly felt like I was the one in control of the game. That morning, the sky hung heavy and gray. Not with rain, but with the storm that was Karen's final act. After 30 days of what felt like a drawn-out tragicomedy, eviction day had finally arrived. I stood across the street, arms folded, silently watching as a county sheriff's vehicle rolled into the neighborhood. 2 uniformed officers stepped out, clipboards in hand, legal documents ready. They headed toward the beige house, my property, the one Karen had clung to as if it were her sovereign domain. The door swung open. Karen appeared, still wearing that familiar mask of arrogance, but the flicker in her eyes gave her away. As one of the officers read aloud the eviction order, I saw the corner of her mouth twitch. "This is my house," she shrieked, but the officer didn't flinch. "No, ma'am, this is his property. You've been notified and warned multiple times. At this point, you're trespassing." Karen's expression shifted, from fury to desperation, then quickly to panic. She turned to me, eyes pleading. "We can work this out. I'll withdraw the complaints. I'll stop bothering you. Please." I raised an eyebrow, not out of resentment, but out of clarity. "You should have thought of that sooner," I said quietly. "It's too late now." She retreated back inside, but instead of packing, she began to rage. The sound of shattering glass, drawers yanked open, and furious screams echoed from within. The officers rushed in, ordering her to stop. I remained still, unfazed. One officer turned to me and asked gently, "Do you want to press charges for property damage?" I glanced at the house, then at the woman unraveling inside it. "Not unless she rips out the foundation," I said. "I just want her out." 15 minutes later, Karen emerged from the doorway, dragging a worn-out suitcase behind her. She looked at me one last time, but there was no contempt in her eyes anymore. Only shame. She said nothing. She climbed into her car and drove away, leaving behind a silence the neighborhood had long been yearning for. Karen was gone. No goodbyes, no apologies. Just the fading rumble of her car engine disappearing around the bend, leaving behind a silence so profound, the kind you don't realize you've been missing until it finally returns. I stood on my porch, coffee in hand, feeling the first morning breeze that didn't come with shouting, judgmental glares from across the street, or red-inked warnings tucked under my doormat. The next day, as I was checking my mailbox, an email from the HOA board popped up. The subject line made me laugh out loud. Notice of HOA board vacancy. Special invitation to a trusted resident. I could practically hear someone trying their hardest to sound warm and welcoming. Now that Karen is no longer with us, we'd love for you to join us in preserving the community. A last-minute olive branch from the very organization that stood silent while I was harassed and bullied for weeks. I didn't respond, not because I didn't care about the neighborhood, but because I understood something clearly. I didn't need a seat on any board to protect the peace here. The best way to keep another Karen from rising is to make sure power is never again placed in the wrong hands. Since that day, the neighborhood has started to smile again. A young boy rode past my house on his bike and waved. The elderly woman from the corner brought over fresh-baked pastries and said she'd been waiting years for Karen to leave. My garden, once scrutinized for being non-compliant with HOA standards, was now complimented as cozy and authentic. I'm no hero. I'm just someone who refused to bow to a person who believed power gave her the right to trample others. And sometimes, justice doesn't need to roar. It just needs someone quiet, steady, and ready to say, that's enough. In a world where power is sometimes handed to those who least deserve it, the story of Karen and the quiet, steadfast homeowner serves as a powerful reminder that justice doesn't simply arrive on its own. It must be stood up for and reclaimed. Karen isn't just one person. She's the embodiment of those who manipulate authority, bully others, and rule through fear. But what matters most is how the protagonist faced her, not with noise, not with emotional retaliation, but with knowledge, with the law, and with remarkable composure. The first lesson is this: knowing the law is a form of power. Many of us can be deceived, intimidated, or taken advantage of simply because we don't fully understand our legal rights. Had the homeowner in this story not been clear about his ownership, lacked proper documentation, or been unaware of the legal eviction process, he might have been drawn into a draining battle, or worse, lost his home. That's why having basic legal knowledge about property rights, contracts, and personal protections isn't just wise, it's a responsibility. It's how we protect ourselves and those we care about. The second lesson: real strength doesn't come from shouting. It comes from patience and resolve. When attacked, our instinct is often to lash out, raise our voice, or lose control. But it was the protagonist's calm, strategic, and confident approach that unraveled Karen's grip on control. In life, when faced with injustice, let reason, not emotion, lead your response. Emotions can cloud your direction, but logic will guide you to victory. And finally, the greatest lesson of all: no one holds power forever if they lack integrity. Karen built her tiny empire on fear and control, but the moment a single truth was revealed, that she wasn't even the homeowner, it all came crashing down. This proves one thing: the truth always finds its way to the surface, and those who abuse power will eventually face the consequences. The story ends with the peace a neighborhood had longed for. But more than that, it delivers a lasting message. Kindness and fairness are not signs of weakness. They are the strongest forces we can carry with us through life. If this story stirred the same frustration in you as it did in us while writing it, then hit that like button to stand together and say, no one has the right to bully others, not even under the name of an HOA. If you've ever dealt with a Karen in your life, someone who abuses their authority to manipulate a community, share this video to let others know justice still exists, and sometimes it comes from those who seem to be backed into a corner. And if you want more powerful stories like this, where arrogance gets dismantled by truth and quiet resilience, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. We'll be back soon with stories even more satisfying than this one.